Hi, everyone, and welcome back to our Monday night Bible study and prayer night. We're glad that you've joined us as we continue to look at different encounters that Jesus had with people through the 4 biographies of him that we have in the New Testament. So if you're joining with us for the first time, you can find our Bible reading plan at nhcbrp.com. And there you'll also find what we call our insight posts. These are kind of blog posts that we do on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday throughout the week with just our thoughts about what we're reading. So you can have that sent directly to your phone if you want to have the convenience, I guess, of that coming in as a text by texting the word Bible to 703-971-4673. So we're sad to not have Emma with us tonight. She's got some school stuff she's doing with her kiddos. So it'll just be the three of us on here tonight, and we're going to be talking about generosity. This is going to be a really good conversation, I'm sure. Oh, David, you look very studious there with your glasses. Thank you.
As soon as you said that, I wanted to make sure I was locked in with my frames on.
Yeah, nice.
And then I'm gonna do this a couple times. Well, what you said there was very, it's a tool now.
Yeah, that'll be good. Okay, good.
I'm going to pull out my little Jesus then, if you're going to pull out your glasses. So,
okay, there we go. See, this is why you want to watch it, not just listen to it.
Exactly. And speaking of little Jesus, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but someone's been leaving little Jesuses all over the building. And it's kind of cool when you walk into a room or something and you find a little Jesus in there. And we all need a little more of Jesus every place we go. So,
and it's being done by the most quiet boy. Oh, excuse, I should have said quiet person that I know, who was recently baptized. And it's just that it's so intriguing to me that this is how he wanted to respond to his baptism and spread Jesus around the building a little bit. So pretty cool stuff.
Well, I love it. I love seeing where I'm going to find Jesus next. So it's been awesome. So I'm going to open us up in prayer. One last thing to tell you, as David said, you can listen to this if you don't want to watch us. You can listen to the podcast. You can find us on any of your podcast platforms. Just search for New Hope Church Lorton. So I'm going to open us up in prayer, and then Rusty's going to kick off our reading. Father, I thank you so much for your generosity towards us. Father, we will never, ever, ever be able to outgive you. And I pray that you would stir that sense of generosity within each of us. God, I pray that you would help us to focus on this tonight, that you would open our hearts to hear things from your word and be able to apply them to our lives today. Thank you so much for your love and your care for us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, I am the designated reader. I'm reading, this is Matthew 6, 1-4 from the New Living Translation. Watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you will lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you.
Okay. So a lot packed into those four verses right there. So what stood out to you, first of all, from what you read?
I think the immediate one for me was the fact that it was only in one of the Gospels. You know, we have weeks where a story could be in 2, 3, or 4 of the Gospels, yet this week it was only in one. I don't think that takes away from the importance of it, obviously, but it was just interesting that giving to the needy, you know, was called out only by Matthew. I still think it makes it personal. I still think it makes it maybe even more valuable because it was only mentioned in the one, but yeah, that was stood out to me. It was in one, not 2, 3, or 4.
Well, I just thought about this too. Matthew was a former tax guy. And I wonder how this stood out to him as a money guy. I mean, this is how he made his living, was he had contracts with Rome to collect taxes. not known to be the most charitable people. Tax collectors were in fact, whenever you mention tax collect, that was in the list of notorious sinners of the day. And yet this is something that really stood out to him about God's economy. Until you said that, I hadn't even thought about it, but it's intriguing. Wouldn't it be great to sit down with Matthew and say, so what caused this to stand out to you?
Mhm.
Yeah. That's an interesting point about Matthew, and since it does involve money and all of that. Another thing that stood out to me from this passage was that Jesus doesn't say like, oh, if you decide to do this, he says when you give
Mm.
to the needy,
Okay.
when you share, your resources, that with this idea that that's just an expected thing that you're going to do. But he's teeing it up of how you do it.
Well, and that led me down that almsgiving. Did you get, no?
No,
All right.
that's good.
Because it said in Jesus's time, I typed this out, almsgiving was considered one of the core acts of righteousness alongside prayer and fasting. It was one of the pillars of Jewish culture. Helping the poor wasn't optional. It was seen as a responsibility and reflection of one's relationship with God. So it was expected, but to Kim's point, how? And I love that he added, I thought it was humor or satire when he talked about they blow their trumpets, because they weren't really blowing trumpets. It was just a joke. I think. I hope. Were they really blowing trumpets, Russ?
There would be sometimes that,
Oh,
because they wanted all kind of fanfare. They wanted everyone to know. It's like most of our giving here at the church is electronic. But I could imagine that at the temple when they were doing it, you'd hear the big bags of stuff drop, and the bigger the noise, the bigger the gifts, and whatever you could do to get attention for it. I heard of there was some years ago, there was a church where they passed the collection plate like we used to pass the buckets. And there was a story of someone that instead of folding their check, they left it open so everyone would know how much they gave because they wanted to get some credit for it. It's the same kind of thing here. When people would fast, this is another part of it. They would dishevel themselves, look like they'd gone without sleep, and also everyone know, oh, they're fasting. They're really, rather than keeping it just between me and God.
I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of texts here. I'm trying to stay focused on what we're doing and what's going on with these texts. So I was thinking in looking at this, it made me, a couple things stood out. I feel like Tom Egham really hit on some really good things this past weekend about giving and about how that's done. And he talked about, a hand up versus a handout. And so I thought that was something that we could unpack a little bit and talk about, because I think that can be a big topic for people, like how the money that they give is going to be used, and wanting it to be used in the best way. But then also about ourselves and how we can, like how do we determine how and when to give, So any thoughts that you guys have on that?
yeah, I love that hand up versus hand out. And it reminded me of the idea of teach a man to fish versus give the man a fish kind of thing. And I think it brings dignity to the whole process for the person receiving whatever it is they're receiving. I don't think it's human nature to want to just continue to receive things. I think they want to you know, have pride in what they do and do their own thing and make way for themselves. And it's just such a great thing when you can provide for people, if it's a resource, if it's schooling, if it's whatever, and then they're able to prosper and then pass that on. It's kind of like a cycle uh, of how things should go in society. Now, of course, you do have people that take advantage of this. I mean, quite honestly, the church, big church, not New Hope, does a horrible job sometimes with the giving. And I think I've shared the story before, and it reminded me when I was reading this that I was working with a church that was doing a building campaign, and I asked them, you know, like, what's the offering look like? And they go, well, we always take the offering at the beginning. And I said, oh, that's interesting. Most churches, you know, take it at the end of the service. And I said, so tell me why you take the offering at the beginning. You know, people come in, they sing a song, and they do the offering. And I was ready for this, you know, theological, you know, this is the reason, you know, set your heart right. It's like, you know, confessing sin before you take the Lord's Supper. I'm thinking, okay, they're setting the table. And they go, no, the ushers go back and they count the money. And if it's not good, then we do a second offering at the end of service. So this leaves us time to do a second one. And it's like, it defeats the whole purpose of generosity and giving. And, you know, it's the motive over the method, I think. And that's always disappointed me. And I think the church in general has lost a lot of people because of the way it handles money or the way it doesn't handle money. And it makes me sad. That's why I'm so proud to be part of something at New Hope that, you know, very rarely, I can't remember the last time you said anything about offering from the stage, you know, and it's not because it's not important to fuel the ministries that New Hope Church is about and the different things that we're involved with. But I mean, you look at it, we're all about, it's like the bike drive we just finished, right? That, yeah, we gave some bikes that were collecting dust in someone's garage or shed. And that now is going to be turned and sold, given to this group in Nicaragua. They're going to finish the bikes, fix them up, sell them, and the proceeds then go help a foster system down there in Nicaragua. So it's like feeding that chain of society success. And yeah, I just wish the church would do better.
Yeah, it's interesting about money, and how it, you know, kind of what it represents to people. And I know a lot of, there's debate when it comes to church leaders on, do you know who the givers are? Do you pursue them, or do you keep it private? And you know, the Bible, Jesus talked a lot about money. I mean, he talked a whole lot about money, but there's no record of him ever taking up an offering. It was always talking about how we relate and the impact on us. And I think it's in a affluent country like we have, we just need to be careful kind of how we look at it, and don't diminish it, but also not fall into a trap of kind of, it's the goal.
Well, and it doesn't always have to be money, right? You know, I know this was specifically talking about money, but you know, we could fall into that trap of being braggadocious or spouting off or doing trumpets for serving or for.
Yeah.
I read through the Bible for the 4th time this year, and you know, I'm in 7 small groups, and you know, it's that whole idea of obedience doesn't need an audience. You know, that's between me and God. And I think in our society, we want to be recognized, and that's a human nature. I think you want to be recognized for doing good, starting at a very early age. But you know, that needs to not have an audience as much as it needs to just be with God.
Yeah, I had a friend that she had rejected Christianity for most of her life. And part of the reason is that her father was a leader in the church that they went to. She said the only time she ever heard her father pray was when the pastor came over and had a meal with him.
Mm-hmm.
It was never part of the life except when it was for a performance to show something. And that's kind of what you're getting at, David, is am I doing all these things for, the prestige or the perception it gives me, or am I doing it because it really does honor God and helps others?
Yeah. Yeah. I had someone was sharing a story with me not too long ago about a person that had done something for them, and it was kind of a prearranged sort of thing. It was something that was, that the person had agreed to do, kind of thing. But then months later came back to the person that had asked and told them that they didn't feel like they had been holding something against them for months because they didn't feel like they had been thanked properly for what they had done. And so it's, it brought up this whole conversation between the person that was telling me and I about, how do you respond to something that is a gift, as someone giving of, their time or, whatever, because that comes up a lot in the church. We're a volunteer intensive organization. And so if you have some kind of agenda behind giving of your time, then it's easy for that mark to not get hit, for you to not be thanked appropriately, in your mind for whatever it is that you've done. And I think that's part of what he's addressing here too, I mean, in talking about money, but it could be time, it could be a lot of different things.
And it's funny how our expectations get unearthed when we don't get thanked appropriately, or someone doesn't respond the way we think they ought to because of our how wonderful we are. And it raised an interesting question to me too about, so when is it okay for someone to know that you've done, in this case, giving? And I don't know that it should be that no one ever knows you've done it. There are times when, like, you might Venmo somebody something because they desperately need it and they're going to know, but how do you do this in a way where it doesn't have strings attached? And how do you do that with, honor? And it raises some interesting, in some cases, maybe some dilemmas.
Yeah, I have a relationship with someone I love dearly who birthed me, that would be my mother, who I can't gift or do anything. If I go over there and rake the leaves out of her front yard or fix her flag or reline her printer again to her mobile phone for the 18th millionth time, she has to have a way to pay me back.
Yeah.
And I don't know where that comes from. But I think sometimes I can do that and have a ledger. Well, Kim gave me that book on Acts that was really cool. I'm going to find a book for Kim and give it to her now. And I don't think the intent by me with my mother or Kim with me is a way that they're looking for something reciprocal back. But I think sometimes it's human nature to want to keep that ledger and give back when we give gifts. And I don't know where that stems from, but I think, we don't give, or we shouldn't give, because we want something back. And sometimes, like Rusty in the church, one of the things, the decisions we made in 2006 was we weren't going to allow people to donate money to the new building for the children's area, because then they would want to paint it purple and put red shag carpet in there because that was their room. And they were looking for something back for their financial donation. And I think we can get into that trap of giving to not only receive credit or say, hey, look at me, but sometimes we want something else in return. You see
Yeah.
it politically with lobbyists and giving of money to help support their cause because you want something back. And I think that could be just as challenging for us to give to get something back or get someone's attention or get somebody's, buy-in for something. And it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's, it goes back to that motivation thing, right? I mean, we talk about motivation so often because on the one hand, you could have the ledger system,
Mhm.
where you're tracking what everybody does and doesn't do, and, and then making sure that your side is aligned with it, which is not at all what I think your mommy does, by the way.
No,
But,
or you, I'm just, yeah, I want to make sure.
yeah, absolutely. But there's the other piece of it where generosity is contagious, and generosity begets generosity. Like I think about, it's kind of a, seems like kind of a silly thing, but if you've ever been the recipient of it, like in a drive-through, and you get up and they say,
Yeah.
hey, that the person ahead of you just paid for your coffee or whatever it was, and then
Mhm.
there's something within you that says, that's awesome, I'm going to pay for the car behind me, and it goes on and on and on, and I think that's a, when you think about the way that God created us, and that there are aspects of us that reflect the nature of God, I think generosity is part of that. That's our God is a generous God, and when we are generous, then we reflect that. We look like our dad,
That's cool. On Sunday in second and third grade, we did a lesson on about walk for water and tied in the Good Samaritan, whereas the little girl said the American. I had to explain to her that it wasn't the American, it was the Samaritan. But we were talking about how for approximately $40, you could give somebody clean water for life. And that they just couldn't understand that. And when it was time to go, one of the boys, the dad came and I called the boy over, and first thing he says to dad is, when is my allowance? When do I get my allowance? He's like, dad's looking at him like, what are you talking about? He goes, you get it on Monday. You always gonna make it. Well, tomorrow give me my allowance so I can give it to, to pay for, this clean water well project. And as I watched the contagiousness of it, the other kids, a brother and sister came to the door, mom's there. Hey, can we get, money to do this? And, people want to be part of something bigger. But I just think it's that whole, you mentioned it, the motive over the method and how we go about it. And is it genuine generosity? Is it
right?
aligned with God? Is it aligned with, what he sees as important? And again, that's a project, Walk for Water, that is all about sustaining themselves so that now they can go to school. Now they can focus on other things. So it's the hand up, not the hand out. So just
Mhm.
interesting how that all works. And kids get generosity, I think, quicker and better than some adults,
Yeah.
myself included. I mean, they will give it. Kim, you've seen that over the years with the Feed My Starving Children project. You see kids
Mhm.
all the time bring you their rolls of quarters or dimes and say, I want to do this. And it's like, wow, it's, you don't have
Yeah.
to give a lot. You give with a genuine heart. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard someone say, and I think this is true, if you want a metric, kind of measuring where you are in your relationship with Jesus, is check your giving and your forgiving.
Mhm.
Um, am I willing to, am I choosing to be generous for Jesus' sake to help others around me? Am I willing to forgive when they violate something with me? Because those are distinctly God-like qualities. But I can mutate those really quickly. Yeah. And it's funny, I've talked to people around Christmas time, you see this where people say, yeah, I'm not going to send them anything this year. They didn't give anything last year. So your list is based on this reciprocity, which is not God's plan, but it's easy to slide into it. it is cool watching the kids that they understand something. Well, what can I do? And they'll be extremely generous with limited income. Get older, we learn to protect it, and
Yeah.
we know our finances better.
Yeah.
One of the things, Kim, that I was wrestling with this idea of being generous or giving without need for recognition is I really have to put a lot of trust in God that he is that his justice is done. And trust can be a hard thing for people. I don't necessarily see God tapping me on the back saying, great job for giving that money, but I have to trust that he is the God that he says he is, and that there's faith in his recognition of that for whatever it looks like for that relationship. But trust was a big thing sometimes for wanting to be recognized when giving, because we might not trust that God's going to account for it appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I also think too that, I mean, there are a lot of scams, going on in the world, and people trying to, get money and stuff. There's nothing more heartbreaking, I think, than, and we've all dealt with this, with random calls that come in, to the church to find out that somebody's taken advantage of your generosity. It's just a yucky thing. But at the end of the day, I feel like what God, the way that I have reconciled this, between God and I, is if I feel a pull towards giving to someone, whether it's someone that I see on the street, or, whatever the circumstances are, I'm responding to that pull. I'm responding to, that conviction of the Holy Spirit, that's telling me to do something. If they're, if what's prompting them to do this is not in line, if they're just out to make a buck or whatever, then I kind of feel like God will deal with them about that. I don't, he doesn't want me to be,
Judge and jury.
Well, yeah, I mean, he doesn't want me to, I think it's okay to research organizations that you're going to give to, and, and to do your due diligence about stuff. I think that's fine. But at the end of the day, I feel like God will cover, if somebody's doing something like that, at some point, it's going to come back on them.
But that goes back to that trust.
Yeah.
That God, if you're pulled to give the guy in the corner, whatever, and then people are, I don't give that guy, he's a drug dealer, a drug addict. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like you. I would rather give, because I feel like in that moment, that's what's needed, and let God do what he needs to do. Because quite honestly, you could have a great organization. What was it, 10 years ago? Tom's organization had a pastor in Uganda go rogue on him. Pastor John, I think his name was, so even in an organization that is Charity Navigator, 4-star and does all these things, people are human and they're going to take advantage. We've had that, like you said about church, we've had come to find out that, mother and daughter have been scamming 7 or 8 local churches for everybody paying their utilities and their rent, so we've got a system in place to help us with that. But it's human nature is going to take advantage of people's generosity. And that's why scams are very popular and they work. It's a shame, but
yeah.
I thought that thing Tom said, if I'm remembering it right, he goes, the hand up versus the hand out, is that the first time someone gets something, they have gratitude. The next time they begin to expect it. The next time they feel entitled. And by the end of it, they're dependent. And so one thing I appreciate is that our team here really does try to evaluate groups that we partner with to help people for the long haul, and not just soothe our conscience in the moment by giving money, but making sure it's going to where you know, like with Hope for Kids, the number of people that have gotten their education or have gotten a leg up on being able to start a business. We've seen that with Feed My Starving Children, where they work with organizations that are caring more about just a meal today, but helping people long term. But if we're gonna to mitigate all risk, I mean, we just don't give to anybody because someone might take advantage of us. And how often does God give and he gets taken advantage of? And so, you know, maybe I need to tap into that more. I mean, there have been resources he's given me that I've squandered, and I got to be honest and humble about it too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So what are some, I guess, guidelines, for lack of a better word, you know, when we're talking about generosity, are there certain things that you guys have thought about on a personal level that sort of guide your generosity? Like I'll share something with John and I. You know, we decided really early on in our marriage, you know, that
Campus
any,
Crusades.
huh?
Is it the campus thing?
I don't know. What are you talking about?
I don't know. I remember you and John support campus people
Oh yeah,
and had
yeah,
been for years because you
yeah,
believed. Yeah, and there was a connection there. I was
yeah,
guessing. I'm sorry.
yeah. John came to Christ through Campus Crusade for Christ, and so
Yeah.
that's been something that, you know, we support people that are missionaries with Campus Crusade. But what I was thinking about was, you know, we have kind of made the determination that, you know, when we've been able to share resources with someone, you know, we don't expect it to ever come back. You know, like we don't go into it, even if it's you know, supposed to be a loan kind of thing. We have decided that one of the things for us is that, you know, if we're going to give it, we're going to let it go. And if it comes back, it comes back. Great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so what are some guidelines or some thoughts that you guys have developed over the years about generosity, about giving outside of your normal giving?
I think for me, it's an immediate reflection on when people gave to me when I needed it outside the norm, and trying to see where someone's heart might be or their situation might be. Um, you know, and I've had some crazy requests over the years, you know, co-sign on my house for me. And like, I don't know if I feel comfortable about that one, but let's, you know, so I think for me, it's not an investigation or an interview, but it's more of a discussion about, you know, how does this align with what you want to do in 3 years, 5 years? Because sometimes, you know, we can make a significant financial or resource investment in somebody or some people. And, you know, to your point, Kim, you got to assume that it is, you know, you're willing to forego this money if you give it to away. But, you know, it's like marriage counseling, you know, is this really something, you know, and you walk through what that's going to look like. And it almost becomes a partnership, or I always wanted it to be, you're inviting me into your life in a way that I can share God, or I can be, you know, that part of my story can come out. Not that it's contingent on that, uh, but I think it's important to give that perspective that, you know, what is it that you're trying to accomplish with this money? How will it sustain you? You know, what other plans do you have? Because a lot of times people are living month to month, and, you know, you help them out on a car payment, and, you know, and, you know, I've gotten burned many a time. Uh, the worst is when I lent my car seats to somebody and then they took them and sold them to a pawn shop. But, you
Mm,
know, you know, it's things are going to happen. You have to expect that, because people are who they are.
yeah.
You know, it's just interesting to me because that whole idea of giving needs to be invisible or should be invisible. but it also shouldn't just be given blindly. So there's a balance there. And I think you have to navigate that however you feel comfortable doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me and Becky, recognizing, I think part of it comes back to recognizing that if God's given us some things, then we need to be more of a channel than a vault. And so what is channeling? If he's given us resources, how best do we channel that in his name to help others? And that's the mindset has helped. Becky doesn't, you can give Becky a number and add or subtract 4 zeros, and it doesn't make any difference to her. She's not a financial expert, but she has a huge heart. And I think between the two of us working as a team, it's really been good to do that. I had a friend that right after he became a Christian realized God had blessed him with a whole lot of finances. And there were several times he would call me and say, here's the situation. What do you think about this person or me giving here and doing all this? And he did some major gifting to others and wanted it to remain as anonymous as possible. And watching him do that as a relatively new Christian had a huge influence on us. Because he took this very seriously. I mean, he didn't try to, he wasn't having things named after him, or he wasn't trying to get everyone to toot his horn for him. And I loved it. It was, and I think so for Becky and I, we try to pray together, talk about it together. Usually we end up negotiating where it's going to be more than I want to give and less, because she doesn't again know the zeros and stuff. But it's also, I guess maybe part of this too is giving can be fun. I mean, when you get to see the impact when it's handled well, and whether it's an organization or a person, and you get to see what wind it puts in their sails, that God's used you to be a blessing to them, and what it can do. I mean, you get used at times. I sure get that, but not as often as maybe we think. And when it does work well, man, it's so cool.
Yeah. I think there's nothing more fun than being part of giving something to someone anonymously and being able to watch, what's happening about it, and them having no idea that, that you were a part of it. That's a really, I don't know. It just, it feels like to me in situations like that I've been able to be part of, it's almost like Jesus and I have a secret, that nobody else knows. It's just like our little thing,
That's cool. Yeah.
But I think that the other thing about this passage too, is this is not talking about your tithing or your giving, your regular giving. This is talking about above and beyond. This is your good deeds that, again, it's expected that we do, and trusting God in that, that, because sometimes, I don't think God expects us to be foolish, with our resources at all, but sometimes there's something that, that you might feel called to do, that God's really pulling you towards, but it doesn't make a lot of financial sense, but for some reason you feel like doing it. I think back to, when we hit the rough point, shortly after we moved into our building and all of that stuff happened, and people stepped up and, did the, committed money, to help us get through what we needed. And, thank God he saw us through all of that, and we were able to, repay people and, and all that stuff. But I'm sure that those were some difficult conversations that people had to have,
Well, people put their house on the line.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't just here's $10. I mean, it was significant
Yeah.
sacrifice for people, or potential, extreme sacrifice. But I think
Yeah.
God was in that story completely, because we had made the decision against the bank's suggestion and recommendation that we were going to pay him back in full, not the
Mhm.
people in our church, but the people that had done the work on building our church. So, God
Mhm.
honors those, and
Yeah. Yeah.
well,
People putting their retirements on the line,
yeah, there was a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can get a
And
little worked up. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I
We
mean,
still have some
that's,
PTSD from some of that.
yeah. But, but they didn't, none of those people did that with the idea, back to David, what you had said before, none of those people did that with the thought that, oh, this wing is going to be named after you, if you
Yep.
do this, or your name is going to be on the back of a seat in the auditorium, or, whatever. This was a very anonymous kind of thing, um, and look what God did, as a result of it.
Yep.
I'll
And-
add
and-
one thing. It's maybe a bit contrary. I don't mean it to be that way, but it was an odd thing. There was a recent, well, in the last year, we had some friends that hit a really bad time financially. I forget how we found out about it. The only way we could get them money was through, I think it was Venmo. They were going to know where it came from. But we felt like it was too important it was an immediate kind of thing to help them. And we didn't do it to get any credit. We just did it because it was expedient. But what ended up happening, by them knowing it came from us, it really encouraged them that because they were not around this area. And I think there are a few times where someone knowing it could be healing, or it could be strengthening in relationships. And again, I'm not saying that to be contrary and say we need to violate this. I think the standard is for it to be done without any fanfare. But in that particular case, it was very healing. And there were no strings. It was not alone. It was just, this is, we've been given, we're given to you. And I think if we adopt God's heart of generosity, there'll be all kind of doors that open up that we get to be a part of what he's doing. And sometimes, I think, Kim, you made this point too, sometimes we're going to get used. Okay, I can't stop all that. I can be wise to the degree I can be, but human nature is still human nature. But I'd rather default toward being generous than protective, so I don't ever get taken advantage of.
Do you still have your verse there on your paper, you're reading?
Mm-hmm.
What was read the verse when it talks about you lose your reward?
Says, when you give this is verse 2, when you give to someone in need, don't do it as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get.
So what does that mean to you guys? The reward part. They got all the reward they'll ever get.
Well, in the almsgiving, I know you did the research on this, that the idea
Significant research. Hold on, Russ. Yeah, I did the research on that. I Googled almsgiving and copied the 3 sentences that it described it. That was the extent of the research. But yes, thank you.
But people were thinking, I'm getting in good with God. I'm gaining not brownie points, whatever you want to call them. I'm going to have jewels in my crown in heaven because of all this. And he's saying, look, you're doing it. Your motive is so screwed up that you might as well just get those guys to blow the trumpet, because you're getting nothing from me. I know your heart, and your heart is so far away from, because there's another time when Jesus is looking at the temple, and the widow that gives the just a tiny, tiny amount. And he goes, she gave more than everybody because God looks at our heart. And we can easily think we're fooling him, but
I just think the word reward, in some of the versions of that translations, it's just an interesting word when you're talking about giving.
yeah.
It's kind of so. And then read the part, Rusty, about the left and the right hand.
But when you give to some, this is verse 4 or verse 3. When you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing.
So I wonder, and I went down this thought of that's now personalizing it to me. My left and right hand are mine. It's not blowing trumpets, but how aware do I need to be in my own mind when I give, to not have, self-congratulating, prideful boasting to myself, building myself up in my heart and my mind, because that's left and right hand is mine. And I got to keep it that secret that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. Kind of led me down this idea that maybe I can give without fanfare, except internally I'm giving myself fanfare, or it's making me feel
using
better.
Your right or left hand to pat yourself on the back.
Yeah. Or I think sometimes I could fall into that trap where it'll make me feel good, and giving should make you feel good. But when I let it go past the point of that immediate emotion, and I now, hey, I just did 3 bad things today, but I gave that guy a McDonald's gift card on the corner and I am looking good.
Yeah.
When we can justify things and trade and barter with God, that's a slippery slope. And I wondered, how much of that left and right hand was about the personal side of giving, not the external public side of giving. And this is a good reminder for us.
Yeah. Listen to these 4 verses from the Message. I think I like the way that it's written. It says, be especially careful when you're trying to be good so that you don't make a performance out of it. It might be good theater, but the God who made you won't be applauding. When you do something for someone else, don't call attention to yourself. You've seen them in action, I'm sure, play actors, I call them, treating prayer meeting and street corner alike as a stage, acting compassionate as long as someone is watching, playing to the crowds. They get applause, true, but that's all they get. When you help someone out, don't think about how it looks. Just do it quietly and unobtrusively. That's the way your God, who conceived you in love, working behind the scenes, helps you out.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, the whole performance in theater and acting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and that God won't be applauding.
Yeah, the scary thing is he knows our thought bubble. He knows intentions behind everything we do or don't do. And he is our audience, whether we think about it or not. And we need to be really aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about the opportunities that we have at New Hope to be generous. I think we do a lot of different things throughout the year that allow people to give, above and beyond their giving. And New Hope is absolutely the most generous church I've ever been part of. And, the way that when you look at over the years, just the amount of money just in Feed My Starving Children alone, that's been donated, and the number of kids that have been fed as a result of that. But what was the number of wells, David, that we've done so far?
35 wells so far.
35 wells. I mean, that's huge. That's life-changing stuff for these villages. And if you've ever been to any of these countries in Africa where water is so scarce and contaminated, and you have to travel a long distance to get clean water, then you realize the value of these wells. But I'm thinking about internationally, we've got our Walk for Water and our work with Hope for Kids International in general. Then we've got Feed My Starving Children. Those are probably our two biggest international things that we focus on. Then we've got our local stuff through our school supplies, our food drive, our foster care stuff, the Project
Coat
Along,
drive.
the coat drive. Internationally, we had the bike drive for Nicaragua. What else? The kids, the thing that we're working on now for the kids that are graduating, the Don't Go
Graduating
Alone
foster.
thing. Yeah, through the foster care stuff.
And you know what's so cool about all of them, Kim, is the intentionality that you've had over the years of including families or making it so kids can be involved. And I think generationally that changes families in this idea of giving. Like, how many kids are excited about Feed My Starving Children, standing on a stool for 2 hours packing on somebody they'll never see? You know, we talked about that Sunday with Walk for Water. You'll never see this person, so why would you care? You know, you always have clean water. Why should you care? Well, it's not right that they don't have, you know, and I'm playing the antagonist, of course, which is a role that I do well. So, you know, teaching the next generation the value of generosity and the way to give and the way to do. And we always put like a experience behind it, or we tell the story behind it. And I think that draws people to these different programs that we're involved with. It's great. And our partnerships are, like you just said, you know, they're local, they're national, they're international. You know, our relationship with LCAC goes far beyond the one big food drive we do a year. We're constantly working with them, constantly giving them tools and resources. And that's great. It's a partnership. And that's the way God wants us to take care of those that are less fortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the kid piece and the opportunities for families to participate in things together, you know, it's hard to find things that you and your children can do together. And we've tried to be intentional about, you know, finding those things too, that are opportunities for them to be able to serve as a family. But I think back to, you know, the early days of our work with Feed My Starving Children, and, you know, kids having lemonade stands and doing all sorts of little, you know, picking up trash and cutting people's grass and things like that, just to, you know, to raise some money. And then I think about the little kids that, you know, that on Sundays would bring us a little bit of their breakfast or whatever that they didn't eat, that they wanted to give to a, you know, a starving child. That kids get it on a level that I think adults kind of, you know, it's easier for us to gloss over need, I think, than it is for children.
Well, it's easy to become callous to it. And I think everyone can tell you a story of an experience with an organization that has scammed them or ripped them off and, you know, misused the money, or you find out, even like we talked about earlier, the church. So the innocence that a child has seeing a need and wanting to respond, is that innocence that I think we need to carry through our adulthood. Expect the best out of an organization and inspect it too. Like you said, do your research. But, you know, that's one of the things that New Hope does, is we are pretty rigorous with who we partner with. You know, it's not just, oh, we need a partner, because Rusty gets a lot of emails from different parts of the world saying, support our ministry and come help us. Do you still get those, Russ?
Yeah, pretty regularly. Yeah. I'm being catfished frequently. But, you know, one thing too that I think is really cool is to see how our silo programs, the preschool, before and after school, and summer camp, have embraced the church-wide kind of things that we do. And a lot of these are families they're not necessarily Christian. They don't necessarily subscribe to maybe a lot of our beliefs, but they do understand this thing of caring for others, and their kids are getting exposed to it in a very practical way. Some churches, and again, there's not a right way to do this, but some churches just budget whatever they're going to do, and they don't really have the individual initiative part. And I'm glad we have a combination of that, because if you have to, if you're raising some money for a specific, or you're gathering the resources, that hands-on multi-generational is, it really does leave a lasting impact.
Yeah.
Well, and I think generosity can be fun. Not only the act of giving, but like we're going to do a walk for water at the end of the month. It's a strenuous thing. I don't know if you've ever been part of that, but you try carrying 40 pounds, let alone the 5-gallon jug. I mean, the 1-gallon jug that only weighs, 8 pounds for 4 miles. It ain't easy.
Yeah.
But they have fun with it and they have an experience. And that's been part of it too, is creating an experience that can be fun and shared by the whole family, leads to that innocence of like, let's give, let's participate, let's help. And it's been a proven model that's worked for New Hope and countless other organizations. So
Yeah.
it's one that I'm always excited to be part of, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple other things I was thinking about that we've had opportunities to partner with is in the Bryant Center, through their project opportunity. And then, crisis pregnancy centers, Mosaic and Sanctity of Life, that have merged together and being able to help support them. And we have, had a from the beginning, and especially since we moved into our building in 2008, just the thought of wanting to be an integral part of our community, of wanting to be a place that if we weren't there, that we would be missed. And being involved with our local schools, the things that we do with them, and we're not sharing all this today to say, oh, we're so great, but just to say that there are a lot of opportunities, for generosity, and we try to make it easy, for you to find something that your heart connects with and be able to give. So as we wrap things up today, I just want to encourage you to think about the opportunities that you have to be generous, whether it's with your time, with your resources, generosity and kindness, just taking the opportunity to share a note in the mail to somebody, or just a call or a text to just say, hey, you just crossed my mind today, I'm thinking about you. These are all things that are important and that help build our community.
And don't do it in expecting a text back.
Yeah.
Do it, like you said, just, hey, you came across my mind this morning. Those are some of the greatest texts I get. Hey, I was praying this morning, popped in my head.
Yeah.
I hope you're doing well. And you're like, out of the blue, and it's cool when you act on that. So follow God's prompting, I think, is the key there.
Yeah. How cool is that when somebody just randomly sends you a text that says, hey, God really put you on my heart to pray for you today, especially if you're really in the throes.
Yes. That's crazy when I get little tingle bumps.
That is crazy. And that's such a sign that, that God sees us and he knows, and if we're open to it, he can rally his people to, help provide the support that we need. So
for sure.
So Emma's not here to do our whole prayer time thing today, but I just wanted to throw those things out as things for all of us to be thinking about and praying about this week, as we continue to ponder this idea of generosity. So Russ, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, I've loved this. It's funny. This is maybe the shortest reading we've had, but we didn't mine it for all it was worth. And I guess one takeaway for me in this is that generosity can be fun and contagious, and to not ever lose sight of that. So I'd like to, I'll close this in prayer. God, you're constantly working to get our attention. And if it weren't for your generosity, we wouldn't be here. You're kind, you're merciful, you're extravagant in so many ways. And forgive us for the times we take that for granted, where we've become entitled. and have forgotten that your love and your mercy and your grace are freely given to us at great expense by Jesus, but you have offered it to us without strings attached. For those of us that know you, God, help us to set our sights on emulating you and to be people that are not just givers, but generous with our time and our money, our abilities, our capacity to enter into people's lives and to help us to realize that we can never outgive you, and that our giving is never to get credit. It's to just continue the work you're doing to encourage and motivate and help others. May we individually and as a church be a place where generosity is just it's just part of our DNA. We love you and we thank you and we commit ourselves to you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
See everyone.
Have a great week.